Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, no, I when I got your email, we're going to be talking about your book today, War Flower, a true story of family service life in Alaska. As soon as I saw your email, I was like, "What? Sober veteran that does yoga and 12-step meditation? Like you're in? Like we have to do this. This is amazing." And my daddy was in the military. He was in the Marines. And anybody that was in the military has a soft spot in my heart. So thank you for your service and thank you for being here today.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk. You know what I like to do? I like to play a little game called the lightning round, which is very slow. So, um, when you first got sober, you've been sober for a while now, but if you think back to when you first got sober, was there a book that particularly helped you on your recovery journey?
Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac. That book I read and reread, and I really idolized Kerouac as a writer and as a drinker. And I strove to be like Kerouac. He was my literary role model growing up. And so I read that book and I knew that Kerouac died a young man, drunk in his mother's house. And that book of him trying to get deeper and deeper into his Buddhist faith, his spirituality, nature, and seeing the clarity in his writing during that time when he was really abstaining from alcohol more than the other books. That book really hit home for me in the need to get sober, stay sober, get outside, and not die a young drunk like my idol.
Yeah, that's it's so painful to watch those people that we love suffer and not get the answer at the end. Did you feel like that was sort of a foreshadowing for you if you didn't get sober?
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah, my mother used to always tell me if you don't stop drinking, you're going to end up like my daddy. And her daddy was a Vietnam veteran who
Oh,
got home from Vietnam. And I don't remember if he died at 41. It was definitely in his early 40s from cirrhosis.
oh,
And, he dealt with all those things and basically built a little shed in the backyard, or maybe he already had the shed. Stories change over the years, but either way, he isolated and lived in that guilt and shame from the things he did and saw there in war. And the only way he knew how to deal with them was drinking. And so my mother would warn me after I came back from war that I'm on that path. And I'd be like, whatever. But then when I had those moments of clarity, I knew I was.
yeah, that's amazing. I mean, we'll have to talk a little, we'll get into it about your experience. But that, seeing what's ahead of you by example, it's in the family, almost the exact same situation, different times, but the feeling, the funny thing about times change, but people don't like we're all different, but the feelings are all the same,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, wow, that must have been really powerful. Do you have a regular self-care or recovery routine I mean, I don't know if you do like a weekly or a morning routine.
Definitely. I am a routine person, no doubt about it. And even when I'm on the road, like now I'm traveling away from home. And so for me, I wake up and I get my kids out of bed and I get them sat to have some breakfast. And then I have to go back into the bedroom and I make the bed. I put everything away and I get on my knees and I ask God for guidance for the day. And I put my forehead to the ground and I humble myself before my creator. And I do that for however long I have until my kids start yelling at me for more. And that is how I start my day every day.
Mm.
Now, what happens during the day changes day to day, but at night, I do lay down in my bed with my daughter. I put one kid to sleep, my wife puts the other kid to sleep, and we turn off the headlamp and I say, "Okay, we're going to turn off the light." We turn off the light and we take a deep breath and then we thank God for all the blessings we've received that day. And we list some of those blessings and then turn the light back on and read a story. And so those, the morning and the evening, kind of the inventories like they talk about in the steps, and starting the day humbling myself. I do those things every day, and they really help keep me grounded, if you want to call my chaotic mind grounded.
Keep you grounded and centered. I love that. I love that gratitude practice. It's something that I feel like everybody should be cultivating. And it's just a habit, really. Like whatever you focus your attention on expands. So it kind of makes sense that if you're focused on gratitude, that you'll receive more of what you were grateful for. Oh, that's
That
beautiful. It's
is
so
the hope.
sweet that you're doing that with your daughter so young. How old is she?
I have two daughters. One is 3 and one is 1. They're both in the half, 3.5, 1.5.
Listen, at 3, that's a big deal. So 3.5, you're already helping her start her gratitude practice. So sweet. Mine are 23 and 20. So yeah, that ship has sailed, but that's beautiful. You're a girl dad. I love that. Do you have a favorite quote or mantra that you live by? Maybe an idea that guides your life?
Well, not so much. No, I don't have a favorite. I have, a few, and then they're constantly rotating.
Yeah.
And
What's an
and so
idea
no,
that visits you often?
an idea would be God help me not be selfish,
Ooh, that's a
because
good one.
I'm selfish, and I've
Same.
tried to work the steps for anger and for this and that, and as we all know, it all comes back to fear and selfishness. And so I am very self-centered, and so I just, I have prayer beads my wife made out of pressed rose petals, and I'll do my prayer
Mm,
beads and say, God help me not be selfish. God remove my selfishness. Anything regarding that selfishness.
yeah.
That's the main one that I'm doing at this time.
Yeah, I really struggle with like the self-obsession. It's like my favorite song is Me, 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 Me. Like, I wake up, what am I gonna do today? What am I thinking? How am I feeling? Yeah.
Yeah.
So being serve outward focused and how can I be of service? Like what can I give instead of what can I get? Those types of ideas.
Mhm.
Yeah. Very helpful being centered. And what's one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
That being around other people who are sober is really the most important thing that I can do for healing and for the role model and mentorship. Because I did it on my own for the first few years without drinking. And I wish I would have
Ooh.
known that.
Do you think, what's interesting about the whole I hear that a lot. Maybe it's especially for men, but like if we had abandonment in our childhood on any level, we sort of develop this fierce independence or this extreme independence. And is that kind of in line with when you first got sober, or do you think it was an outcome of your work experience or?
I imagine there's a combination of before military, childhood up through military. And then, I was out of the military for 8 years before I really did get sober and stuck with it. So, yes, I very much am that person still today that thinks I can do everything on my own.
Well, you're in Alaska on a homestead, so I'd imagine that I that comes in handy up there.
It
Yeah,
does.
yeah, yeah. But we can definitely take that independence a little too far, and there is so much beauty and connection with others. It can be scary at first, but yeah, having community around, big life changes is really important.
Hmm.
Very good. Well, that's kind of it for the lightning round. Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about how we got here. Let's talk a little bit about like some of the early years. I always find it very interesting. I feel like childhood sets the stage for everything else. So tell me
Hmm.
a little bit about what your family was like. Did you have alcoholism in your family? Well, you said your grandfather, but anybody else?
Yeah. I can't say that they were alcoholic. My mother left my father when I was only a few months old, and they both they met in their late teens, and I know they did a lot of partying together. Whether they were addicts or not, I'm not sure. But after a number of years, when my mother finally, had two sons and she was like, I'm ready to make this change, my father wouldn't make the change. And so my mother moved with us boys from where we were living at a little oil rig site, the story goes, in California up to Nome, Alaska. And we moved in with an uncle there. And still, I can't say there was heavy drinking in the house. I don't remember any drunken fights or drugs growing up. I mean, of course, I remember my mom drinking beers, and she later met a man who was in a band and they got married. And I remember going to the Roadhouse, which was the name of the bar outside of town in Nome, and my stepfather would play guitar and sing. And when he wasn't on stage and we weren't at that bar, that Roadhouse, the whole family dancing, I never saw him really having fun or being
Mm.
happy. He was very serious.
Oh,
And
wow.
so from that early age, I don't know if I put in my mind that having beer and alcohol made everybody have fun, or if it was going out on the town and being dressed up made everybody have fun, or if it was playing music, and it was a lot of different things. But I didn't see my mother and him really drinking heavily ever. I don't remember that. As the years went on and we moved from Nome to Eagle River, Alaska, my mother started getting deeper and deeper into what I can see now as a depression,
Mm.
gaining weight, more lethargic, kind of letting herself go. And, she would have, if it was every day or every other day, a 12 pack of Corona. And, I wasn't keeping track. I don't know how many beers she drank a day, and then there was always, some liqueurs under the sink. But I don't know. My mother's dead now, and I'm not sure if she was an alcoholic. I know she liked to drink, and she ended up making the decision to leave my father and then get with that man. And they ended up being married for 8 years, I believe.
Mm.
And then she left that man to be with another man, and the next man was in prison for life in the state of Alaska in a maximum security prison without parole. And so while they were married for about 13 years. And
I'm
because
sorry
he,
to interrupt you, but was he in prison the whole time?
yep, he's still in prison today.
How did she meet him? Just like through letters or something?
Through an odd series of events, meeting different people in Anchorage that ended up being his family that lived in these Anchorage communities. And she spoke with him on the phone one time when she was at one of their houses. And in that phone call, she agreed to bring his son from Anchorage down
Mm.
to Seward to visit him because he hadn't seen his son in over 15 years at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. And so my
Yeah.
mother agreed. The day came for her to drive down there with the son, and he didn't show up. She went down there, and 6 to 9 months max later, they were married.
Wow. Hmm. Okay. So what did
So
that?
is that alcoholic thinking? I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, listen, there's that's a whole other can of worms, but
Yes.
um we're not here to diagnose your mom, but that is really
No.
interesting. But
Mhm.
I wonder what that effect had on you, like not having your dad around. It sounds like he was far away. Did you see him much growing up?
No, I do believe that fatherlessness or absenteeism, whatever the word may be, has impacted me and my brother. Hate to speak for
Yeah,
him,
right.
probably more than any other issue. So
Yeah.
I didn't meet my father until I was 25. I never talked to
Oh,
him on the phone. I didn't receive letters from him. Occasionally, we would get child support, and that was really the only communication we had was through a monthly check that may or may not arrive.
and how did that make you feel growing up, not having a father?
Like I was not loved by the
There it
person
is.
who, you know, who donated part of his body to my mother. And, I'm his
Yeah.
DNA. And so, yeah, unloved, unwanted.
Yeah, that's brutal. That's a brutal way to start out, this feeling. I've heard that there are three primary wounds, right? Like I'm alone, I'm not lovable because I'm either too much or not enough, and not worthy. Those are those three core wounds. And I think as we carry that and we're developing, um, we start to look outside ourselves for what could make us, what can fill that gap. And I'm curious, what other ways, how did you try to fill that void? Did you start drinking early to fill that void, do you think?
Oh, definitely. But I think before drinking, it was I'm going to be the best baseball player anyone's ever seen. And then it was I'm going to be the best skateboarder and I'm going to be the best student. And all those things eventually dwindled away for certain reasons. But when alcohol was introduced around 11, 12, then my athleticism, my desire to be a good student, all those things just kind of disintegrated with it.
Yeah. It's funny how alcohol tends to suck the life out of you even
Oh yeah.
even at a young age. And so
Yep.
you had your first drink at 11. Obviously, you didn't become a daily drinker, but were you more of a binge drinker? What did the drinking look like from that point on?
Yeah. I can't remember exactly when I had my first drink. It was around that time. And then probably around that was like on the weekends, 11, 12, 13 on the weekends. And then when the shift happened in my family with my mother marrying a man in prison, my brother went to prison at the same time. And then we moved from the town of Eagle River to a small fishing town of Seward, Alaska. I moved into town, and I don't know how other people thought of me, but how I felt was I am the prison family kid. They have
Oh
no
man.
baseball here, so I couldn't play baseball. It was a very small, tight knit community of people who grew up together. And so, how would I create my identity? Well, by being the kid who didn't care in school, who skipped every day, who either smoked bud from the second I woke up until I went to sleep, or drank, or I did both, So from that point, which was in my 10th grade year, between ninth and 10th grade, which was probably 14, 13, 14, is when 14, 15, yeah, when I really started just drinking any chance I could. So,
Yeah, that's a really difficult age, that 14,
mm-hmm.
15-year-old period of time, because we're shaping our identity. And if your identity is I'm actively gonna not care, like this identity of we're the prison family. What happened to your brother? Why did he go to prison?
Because he was involved in drugs and alcohol at a young
Yeah,
age, and he ended up committing a crime that was, it didn't hurt anybody, but it was armed robbery. And so
yeah,
he got sentenced as a juvenile, but he was 16 and he got sentenced as an adult. And
At
so he,
16?
yep,
Oh
yep.
my
So he went
God.
went to the maximum security prison in Alaska, where he was surrounded by serial rapists and serial killers, and that's where he grew up. He spent the next 7 years there.
Oh my God, your poor
I know.
brother.
Yep.
That is so sad. Oh my gosh. Um, I can't imagine how powerless you must have felt during that time, you know, being with
Mm-hmm.
so it was just you and your mom and all the things that came with that. I mean, it's no wonder. It's like if we're not taught healthy coping skills, then we tend to, find something that will help us soothe those feelings. And it makes sense, right? It makes sense that you drank and did drugs and did all those things.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense. So walk me through how did you make the decision to join the military?
Well, there were a lot of series of events, a long list of them, but really to break it down, when I was a senior and I had all my friends that were getting ready to go to work on a fishing boat, or getting ready to go to college in Reno, or whatever it was, I really didn't even know if I was going to graduate high school. And I was a daily drinker, pill popper, pill snorter, alcohol or weed smoker. And so, I really wanted to do something honorable,
Yeah.
and I wanted to change my life. And so it was after 9/11. And so, of course, there was a lot of ramping up of the soldiers. And yeah, I ended up seeing the recruiter that came into the school, and he was so proud. And I was like, wow, I want to be that proud man. And
Yeah.
so I signed up.
And what branch of the military did you sign up for?
I was in the Army, I was
The
an
Army.
airborne infantryman.
So you were jumping out of planes.
Yep. And helicopters.
You decided to be all you could be. That's amazing. What was your experience like in the early days?
Well, it was tough. Yeah, I was really out of shape, and I thought I was a tough young kid, and I had a lot of heart, but physically I was weak. And so, I really got beat down in the beginning, and then I loved it. I loved the structure. I loved the purpose. I loved the brotherhood and the camaraderie.
Yeah.
I loved, kind of having all these male role models that weren't my father, but I was learning, the type of masculinity that I wanted, and others that I was like, whoa, this guy is way too machismo. And so, yeah, I really loved it.
And how many years did you serve?
4 years.
4 years. And so tell me what was the progression of being deployed? Like what was that like?
Yeah. So I was called up in probably February of 2003. I joined in May of 2002. I was 17. February or so 2003, we got orders from the duty station. I was stationed in Italy, and we got told that we were going to parachute into Iraq. And March 26th of 2003, we loaded an aircraft. We flew over there to Iraq, and we parachuted in. Now, don't get me wrong, I could go longer and longer with all these stories. I mean,
I need some
but I
stories because this is
yeah,
amazing.
but this is a sobriety podcast, and so I'm like trying to focus on now and sobriety and not go into all the war stories. There's my book, there's other podcasts, and then there's stories.
There's
But
other podcasts. What?
yeah, besides this one, I mean, this is the only one. That's what I
This
mean.
is yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I got to Iraq, and we were there
Were you
March
terrified? Was
26th.
it terrifying? Like
Oh
knowing
yeah.
what you were going into? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I
How did
hardly knew what we were going into. We thought we were jumping into a desert, and we were jumping into a knee deep mud pit that we were shivering in for days. And we thought we were jumping in to find Saddam and go fight the Republican Guard, another military force. And what we ended up finding ourselves in was surrounded by a potential enemy everywhere, because it was all guerrilla tactics of us being shot at or blasted by IEDs by people we couldn't see. And so it was completely different than what we thought. And it was terrifying. But like anything,
Yeah.
just like drinking, I got used to it. And I became not scared anymore, became a cold, whoo, you shoot at me, it's over with. And so then trying to get out of that
Mm.
mindset has been, well, I've been out of the military for 20 years, I think, just about. And
Wow.
still, I go back to that mindset sometime. It got so ingrained during that
Mm.
first year of being there.
Yeah, that's really scary. I would imagine, I mean, the mindset that you sort of have to adopt to survive. I'm sure, did you experience losses there as well? Did you lose friends? Did you?
That's something that I'm so grateful for, is that we were hit. I don't even know how many times we got ambushed or we had firefights. Not one of the guys that I worked with died. There were
Wow.
injuries,
Yeah.
most of the guys got some kind of injury, Purple Heart. But no one I was with died. Definitely dealt with casualties on the Iraqi side, both civilian
Mm.
and non-civilian, and
Mm.
some of the guys that were not quite in my platoon, but that I would see around, that were in our zones, they had casualties, but nobody that I directly work with died, and I thank God for that every day.
That is such a blessing. And did you come out
Mhm.
unscathed?
I did. Yep, I came out no Purple Heart. I I
Listen,
mean,
we don't want one. So
I don't.
congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So tell
Hmm.
me a little bit about it. Listen, I know that in that area that's considered they're Muslim, right? So there's no alcohol, but
Hmm.
did you continue drinking while you were
No.
there, or so you were completely dry while you were there? And
Yep.
then tell me how your drinking progressed once you got home.
Yeah. So before I went there, I was in Italy and I was able to drink, and I was just right off to the races, a drunk again, blacking out all the time. And then when I went to Iraq, there was one instance where I got a bottle of whiskey and I blacked out, me and a few of the guys. And that was the only time in that year that I drank. And then when I got back to Italy, it was again right back to the races. I was constantly looking for my rifle, constantly scanning everything that you can scan, hyper vigilant, hyper aware. And I
Mm.
didn't know any tools of how to channel that energy. And so, yeah, every day, when we got off work at 4:30 or 5, it was boom. Before we were out of our uniform, we were getting drunk. I was getting drunk. And and then yeah, I just basically stayed drunk every day for probably a few months until I was transferred duty stations to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I got in a with another unit, and I wasn't drinking as much there because it was a new unit. I was really trying to be a stud and, show off my skills and my expertise, and so I was able to temper back my drinking at first, but then we got orders to go back to Iraq, and I didn't want to go. After my first tour, I was not for what we were doing anymore.
Mhm.
And so while I loved the structure and being in the military, I didn't believe in that mission that we were doing in Iraq. And so I was trying to get kicked out. And I'm so thankful I didn't. But by trying to get kicked out, I was drinking every day, driving on and off post. I'd show up to work, smoking weed. All the leadership knew, and they knew I could still max all the tests. I was really physically strong and active. And so anytime they'd try to punish me, I would just, okay, punish me. I thrived
Mm.
on the punishment, and really punishing myself is how it felt for what I had
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Um, But then they sent me back to Iraq. And the second year, I didn't, there was one time we made some hooch or some pruno. And I think I had one drink and it was basically just like rotted fruit. And I was like, well, this ain't going to work. And we all put them down.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you did the second tour, you came home
Yep.
again without the Purple Heart. What was the transition like to, I mean, so I think it's fair to say that you came back with some PTSD. Is that fair?
No doubt about it.
Yeah. And I'm sure you had plenty of close calls and had to do things you didn't want to do that's hard to live with, and you come home. What was your transition like?
Yeah, I mean, the main job as an infantryman that I was doing there, my first year was kicking in doors and searching houses.
Oh my
And
God, how
so,
scary.
I mean, we would cordon, we'd close off these towns and then we'd go. I was in a squad where we'd go house to house and kick in the door and then enter the house, pointing our guns at the people. Boom, searching for enemy.
Families
And
and
oh man, these women asleep, not covered, the kids crying. And so it was just like over and over every day. And of course, there were times we didn't have that mission. We'd do other missions, searching cars or whatever it was. But that really impacted me. I didn't
yeah.
realize it.
Were you
But
numb
it
at the
sure did.
time when that was happening?
Oh yeah. It
You were
was
just
all
like a
about
machine mode.
straight up. I'll do whatever I can to not be killed.
Yeah.
And we keep getting hit by RPGs, IEDs, and small arms fire, AK-47. And I don't care who you are, but I know you're involved. And so I was looking at the entire
Mm,
population
yeah.
as enemy. And, then after I went home back to America and Alaska, and I started really being able to slow down, it's like, oh my God, I started feeling that guilt and shame. And so my
Mm,
second deployment was different. I was security for a general and a sergeant major. And so everywhere they went, like I was right next to them as security. So I was good at security because my first year, I was always hyper vigilant. And even my counselor today says, you are the most aware person I've ever worked with. And I tell him, well, it's because I'm a writer. Like I'm an author. I need to be. But really, it's because of my first tour that trained me to
mm.
be that way. So the
Those two
transition,
things together, that's a very interesting combination. Self-aware and physically aware.
mhm.
Yeah.
So the
That's a
transition was tough.
Bob, that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot to process, once the numbness wears off, once your humanity starts, like I'm sure you like melt into back into who you are, and then the reality of your experiences that need to be processed, right? And I would imagine you probably didn't have a lot of tools. Is that fair?
That's very fair.
No tools. So what else are you gonna do, right? So when did you decide that the drinking was a problem and you needed to get help? Did you have like a moment of clarity? How did that work out for you?
I can't say I had a moment of clarity. It was multiple times, like so many people with relapses. It was right when I got out and visiting my mother and just blacking out and puking out of the car and just not being able to be around anybody and drinking. I knew right then, okay, I've got a problem with drinking. I was
Yeah,
22 when I just got out of the military. And so then from 22 until 30 is when I'm, to this day, God willing, I've been sober since I was 30. I'm 39 now. Um,
congratulations.
yeah, thanks. I had quite a few periods of sobriety, whether it was a few months to
Hmm.
6 months to a year. I think at one point I had 2 years, and they were from anywhere from I got out of the military, I went to Alaska, and then I went down to Hawaii and then Central America.
Mm.
And so I got out, I had probably about $60,000, and all I wanted to do was just travel. And I got to Alaska and I got in that rut of drinking every day, smoking bud, My friends would say, we can find you anywhere because we just got to follow the trail of marijuana. And at the time, it wasn't legal, but I would have these big bags and I just didn't care. I'd smoke all day and then I'd drink with it and then I'd drive all
Sounds
over.
familiar.
I bet it does.
Me and you would have been friends.
We could still be as sober
Yeah.
people.
Yes, thank you. Obviously. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's just it's a tough place to be. Like, there's a lot of permissiveness around weed these days, and
Mm-hmm.
I get that it can be a path of harm reduction. But I interviewed this guy who said something, I'm not sure if I'll get it right, but it was like being addicted to weed is like a bottomless trap door. Like you don't like nothing necessarily like when I was drinking, I was a terror. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
like I was a tornado running through people's lives. But when I was high and smoking weed, I was a bump on the couch. Like I wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
threat to anybody. Not really,
Yeah.
more myself than anything else. But weed is one of those things that, comfortably numb, the Pink Floyd song, that was like my
Mm-hmm.
anthem. And, I think that's, it was just a way of coping. Like I didn't have any coping skills. So I needed to self-soothe. So I would just like check out. So did you have similar feelings around weed in that
Oh, what?
regard?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, ever since I was a kid and I first started drinking, I smoked weed and I
Hmm.
smoked weed all day from the start. I wasn't just here and there, and I didn't at all while I was in the military, besides when I was trying to get kicked out. But yeah, when I got out, I was really excited to be able to smoke again. But really, it got into I was having nightmares and I
Mm.
didn't know how to soothe these nightmares. And so I convinced myself that I was using this God given plant to, to
I
help my
love that.
nightmares.
I
Yeah,
love that talk track. It's natural.
exactly. And it did keep me from dreaming. The
Oh,
alternative
it did.
that I thought at the time was, the high blood pressure medication that the VA was trying to give me. But I didn't want to start popping pills. I was snorting a lot of them in high school and I didn't want to be around pills. And I was raised kind of my mom was really into I'm not trying to be political here, but my mother was into non-vaccinations, non-medications, other than like plants and medicine. And so I didn't want to get hooked on pharmaceuticals. And
Yeah,
so, yeah,
that's
I
fair.
used weed every night. And then the unfortunate thing was in the morning, I would continue.
Yeah. Nothing like that first side of the day.
I know.
We shouldn't be
So,
talking about
uh,
that.
yeah, but it's part of sobriety, I guess.
I mean, it's the truth.
Really.
Like that's what
Yep.
happened. And then we come
No
to a
doubt.
place where we just are so uncomfortable with how the status quo that, the discomfort gets so bad that not changing is more painful than actually doing the work of changing.
Yep.
So how did you enter? So you're abstinent. And so, okay, it sounds to me, if I understand correctly, there was a periods of relapse. Like you had periods of sobriety and then you would relapse,
Hmm.
which is also really hard. And in my mind, people that relapse often have unresolved trauma. Does that check
Hmm.
out for you?
No doubt about it.
Yeah. And so what did
Yeah.
you do to get help around your trauma?
I started practicing yoga in my
Mm,
travels in Central America. I stayed at a yoga house and I stayed there for probably 6 months where I started doing Ashtanga yoga 6 days a week. And it was really hard paced. It was they tried to have it be an alcohol free, drug free yoga house. There were about
mhm,
12 of us who lived there. And so, I got really into the physical and spiritual practice of yoga. And then I left that yoga house and I continued traveling south. And in Costa Rica, I house sat a house there for 3 months by myself. And that was the first time I was really alone since I was in the military,
mhm.
since before, because I wasn't alone
Right.
really ever in the military.
Yeah.
And I put pen to paper and I just started writing and writing and writing. And
Wow.
And that is where the first draft of my book came out of me,
I
was
was
at
just
that place. Yeah.
that's beautiful. So it was like I've heard that many times, like the writing into recovery method, like,
Hmm.
and it's beautiful that you had a combination, and you had already had exposure to the 12 steps. Is that true?
Nope, no
No,
exposure.
not yet. Okay, so it was yoga, it was community, and then it
Hmm.
was writing. So was the
That's right.
writing a way to process everything that you had experienced and
A lot of the things that I had
a
experienced.
lot, yeah.
Yeah, but part of why my story took 15 years to publish from start was because it was just like doing the steps. The first time was this much, second time was this much, with the fourth and
Mm,
fifth. And so
yeah.
over the years, it's been more and more. And since then, I went to India and Nepal, and I did Buddhist
Wow.
retreats, and I did different meditations that helped me with forgiveness of self and others. And I was silent during those times. And then I was a vegetarian for almost 8 years, which gave me a lot more compassion and made me feel like I was doing good instead of harm every
Mhm,
day to animals, including, humans and farmers, and then ethically eating. I'm not going to say I'm perfect now. I'm not a vegetarian, but I do still really try to eat ethically. And all those things I think really came together with little periods of sobriety because of handshakes with friends that was like, okay, we're going to stop drinking. But I would still smoke weed. I just wouldn't
mhm,
drink.
mhm.
And then when I was 30, before I was 30, is when, all these pieces came together. And I had this property, which I still own and live at in Alaska, that's off grid, our little farm up there. And I was holing away up there by myself for years. I hadn't, it was 2 years, and I was just brutally depressed. I ended up leaving the property because I was suicidal and going back to Seward. And then, yeah, a series of events happened where I was praying, asking for God, asking for strength from God to go back to my property and do it on my own. And I thought God gave me these signs that were like, you can do it on your own. You've got this. And then the day I was about to leave Seward to drive the 210 miles back to my farm, I met with my friends and I broke my ankle skateboarding. And I had no money. I was in debt from credit cards. I was receiving, I think, $1,000 a month at that time for a veteran's disability compensation that covered my mortgage, paid most of my credit debt. And now I had a broken ankle, three bones broken in my ankle, two
Wow.
dogs, and at that point, that was my unmanageability.
Mm,
And and I ended up being put up from friends. I wasn't able to go back to my property that whole summer and for almost a year. But I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to get in this little place. My friend put me up in this place. I'm going to stay here. And I know I'm going to be on pain medication, but I'm going to finish my book. I'm going to get it published. I'm going to use this time to get off of alcohol and weed and cigarettes. And I'm going to get clean and sober. And, we all know this is the time. And gosh, everybody who stopped by, they'd bring me cigarettes, they'd bring me bud, I mean, and so
yeah.
really when it finally hit was when I I used crutches. I crutched down the road to the bars because I was lonely, and I met up with some friends down there, and I blacked out.
Mm.
And I went back. I got back to my place, and I woke up the next day. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I did it again. We all know the feeling, just
Oh yeah.
ashamed. I had no money, so someone must have bought me all my drinks, and so I swore, I'm not doing it again. And then a couple weeks later, I'd stayed sober. A couple weeks later, stayed sober, meaning I was still smoking weed, smoking cigarettes, and popping pills, but I was not drinking.
Not drinking. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up going, a friend invited me to his wedding in Denmark. And, I went to Denmark, I went to Copenhagen. I had a couple weeks of no alcohol under my belt. I was excited to be there. And I didn't drink. I didn't drink. I didn't drink. And then finally, the wedding day happened. Everybody was drinking scotch and wines, all real high class drinks. And finally, at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I caved and I started drinking. And I had a great time. I danced. I drank the best wines. Red wine was my thing. So I drank the best wines and bourbons, and I loved whiskey. And so I didn't black out. I feel like I was tempered with my drinking. I was fun. I didn't spiral into a depression later that evening. But the next day when I woke up, that's all I wanted.
Yeah.
Whew. And so that was the first day of me not drinking, was that next day.
Wow.
And that was my sobriety date today.
That's amazing. After
Yeah.
all, I thought maybe it was going to kick in and take you on a ride, but and so you probably didn't know that that was your last time. How did you get involved in 12 step?
Yeah, that's where I wish I would have known before, because I got involved in 12 step because I had a friend, an old friend, who asked me to be his sponsor. And at that point, he asked me to be a sponsor. I hadn't drank in 3 years, but I still smoked weed every day. I was still
Mm,
depressed. I was
mm,
living by myself out in the middle of nowhere. And so I'm like,
mm.
oh, okay, I'll see what it takes. And so I'm Googling it. I'm trying to figure it out, how to be a sponsor. And I knew there was an AA meeting in the town where I lived, but I had never been. I really didn't think I was an alcoholic. I just thought I had a problem drinking. And so I went down there and I realized I fit right in, and I stayed around, and being around all those people gradually is that harm reduction approach for me. I think I
Yeah.
was in AA for a year and a half before I was like, you know what? I want to quit smoking cigarettes. I didn't want to quit smoking weed because
Mhm.
I had that idea that smoking weed helped me. I've always been ADD. It helped me sit down and learn how to play music.
Mm.
And so when I first quit drinking, but I smoked all the time, I just obsessively learned guitar and learned how to sing with the guitar. And so much of my grief came out from songwriting and
Oh,
singing, and I
yeah.
just cry and cry. But I was completely isolated with no friends, very suicidal and depressed. So,
Yeah, it's just
was
not,
it good?
you
I
wouldn't
don't
recommend
know.
it? Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you go to 12 step meetings. Did you do the whole thing? You got a spot. So I that's amazing that somebody asking you for help compelled you to go to be of service. And it's so
Hmm.
interesting because in the 12 step literature, it does say that nothing ensures sobriety like intense work with another alcoholic. So did you then get a sponsor and do the whole thing yourself?
Yeah, right off the bat, a couple people were like, "Oh, let me be your sponsor," and I didn't like them, and I didn't want them to be. And
Yeah.
so the first time I worked the steps, it was with a lady who I'd really come to trust, and she had my mother's name, and my mother had recently died, and so I was like, "Wow,
Oh,
this is."
it
And
felt
so I
right.
worked. It did. I worked the
Yeah.
steps with her,
Hmm.
and that it was transformational. And
Wow.
then I was also seeing a counselor at the time, but then I moved to Olympia, Washington to finish my college degree. And while I was there, my AA group in Alaska at that time was probably anywhere from 2 to 5 people max, all with over 20 years of sobriety, all in their
Mm.
60s.
All right.
And so it's tough for me to really
Yeah.
identify with them. Um, but they were always talking about how big AA is, how huge this movement is, and they were all about the history, and I love those guys. But when I moved to Olympia, I ended up meeting a whole bunch of people that were my age, and I got a sponsor there. I worked the steps again. I would hang out with them every week for 1 hour, reading the book, doing step work. He'd make dinner. First time I ever had somebody microwave meat. It was really weird.
Okay.
But,
Nobody's perfect.
no, I love that guy.
Yeah.
And he was so humble and helped me work the steps, and he smoked weed, which he was like, I didn't for 20 plus years as a sober guy, but then it became legal. And I thought, well, I'm going to try this. And he was honest about that. Me, I had
Okay.
just quit smoking weed,
Yeah.
but to see his honesty and how imperfect he was, I just
Yeah.
really respected him. And so, yep, worked the steps, did that thing with him. And then I came back to Alaska and I got another sponsor. And that guy has now been my sponsor. I don't know how the timeline works, but we've known each other. We've been working together since at least 2019, 2020, and he's
Okay.
still my sponsor today. And I talk to him all the time. He's my boy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love hearing how you had a transformation, and me, I'm an advocate of the 12 steps because it is a transformational process. And like you described, it wasn't perfect. I mean, it's interesting, like in the 12-step community, it would be very frowned upon to be working with somebody that's not practicing complete abstinence, but the rules of 12 step is in that community is the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, so listen, it just goes to show that it doesn't matter what they do, it matters what you do, and it matters
Exactly.
how you feel, and
Yeah.
you found a way. And there's a lot of obstacles, barriers to entry, and there's some things that are problematic about it. But the truth of the matter is it's a take what you like, leave the rest kind of a deal. And it
Hmm.
sounds, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you found a solution to help manage your feelings and stop doing the things that you wanted to stop doing. Is that fair?
Big time.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
love
like you
that.
said, me too. Me too. I've always been kind of, well, wanted to be a rebel, like so many alcoholics and addicts. And
Everybody
so,
is a rebel, but so to not. Yeah.
exactly.
Conformity is
So,
actually the rebellion there.
yeah, when I was told not to have male or female sponsors, and I was reading the book and I didn't see all these things, but
Doesn't say that anywhere.
I had such issues with men that this woman, I was like, there's no way I'm going to open up with a guy. So my
Yeah.
first steps doing it with a woman. And, I remember, I'll never forget, we sat in her truck for 5 hours smoking cigarettes while I did the fifth step.
Hmm.
And at the very end of it, she says to me, she says, "Hey, Bob, so is that everything?" I was like, "Yeah, I can't think of any more." She goes, "Well, your brother told me that you were in the military." And I just
You
started laughing.
you left
I
the whole
just,
military stuff out.
yeah, I just started laughing
Wow.
hysterically. And she was like, "He said you did 2 years in Iraq." And I just laughed and laughed. And she was like, "Do you want to talk about any of that?" And I was quiet for probably 3 minutes. And finally I said, "No, I'm not ready." She said, "Okay,
Mm.
next time you do the steps, maybe you'll start opening that can of worms, but right now you don't need to." And that has been so helpful for me with the growth.
Yeah. Yeah. To allow you to be safe and to do it at your own pace. That was a really wise woman.
Hmm.
And she had the humility to, trust you to go through your own process.
Yeah.
That was amazing. That's amazing. That's one of the best
No.
stories of sponsorship I've ever heard. That's beautiful. That's going to be the clip, by the way. That was amazing. It gave me chills. My goodness. Well, listen, I love all the work that you're doing. I think it's amazing that you have been able to, really take the time to allow this book to be birthed in its own time, right? There was just more to the story. And I think it's a beautiful testament to honoring your own process, everything that you went through. There is no perfect timeline. There is no perfect way. Everybody does it different. And
Mm-hmm.
I just really appreciate that you honored your own path. And when you were talking about forgiveness of self and forgiveness of others, and just the whole healing that you have done, you've acquired so many tools, the Buddhism, meditation, yoga, service that you've continued to do. And being in nature, obviously, where you live, and raising this beautiful family that you have is just an amazing testament to what you can accomplish, with a little bit of hope and a little bit of love and support and maybe a whole lot of patience.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I definitely want to emphasize that today, this life that I have, I mean, I live on 20 acres of land. We paid off our place a few years ago. My wife is beautiful inside and out. She's been sober longer than me. We have two daughters. I'm a present father, and I'm writing and I'm working with animals and the earth every day when I'm home. And that, the healing for me that has come from planting seeds, nurturing plants, chickens, ducks, goats. I mean, the hard work and the routine of everyday
Mm,
chores has helped me to grow into the man that I've always wanted to be. And the human being that I've always wanted to be. So I'm really grateful that you brought up like the current situation. I think it's easy to get stuck in all these things, that happened in the past, but right now is so good. And
yay.
I hope other people, if anybody listens, they can have that hope and that drive and that perseverance to just keep moving forward while glimpsing at the past, but just to keep moving forward, man.
Yeah. I mean, you've created a beautiful life for yourself. I know you guys have a website and you're documenting your journey. And I was telling you, I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many, like the whole homesteading life. Like I'm obsessed. I mean, I had chickens when I was in San Jose, and I loved my little chicken farm. I had the fancy chickens, like the silkies and the Polish and stuff. So I'm a fancy girl. I like fancy chickens. But no, there's so many shows about Alaska because people, I think, are yearning for this connection with nature and
Mm.
self-sufficiency and independence. I think that really strikes a chord in people's heart. That is like a very rebellious, act, but it's also so humbling and centering and connected to spirit as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
if people are interested in following I know you share your journey on the homestead through your website and your writing and things like that. When if people are interested, how do they find you online?
Yeah, they can find us online at secretgardenalaska.org. And I just want to put in a plug for you because I talked to you about a month ago and you were
Uh-huh.
telling me you guys should do this Patreon, you should do this, you should do that. And I was like, no, we don't want to do
She's
any of that.
crazy.
And we ended up looking into some of the things and we started a newsletter. And so we just put the newsletter out today. It was our first one.
Yay.
Yeah, newsletter with a video. And it costs people $1 a month if they want to do the newsletter. Then the next tier is like $5 for newsletter and video with discounts from our shop, and then $10, or they could do it for the whole year. But either way, we've got 19 subscribers already. And
Woohoo.
I mean, my wife and I are so excited. So I just want to thank you so much for giving us that idea to
Yeah.
do that.
Listen, you are just starting and your shop it's so charming, like all the things that you guys are doing, and there's so much potential. And I think you guys are gonna develop a huge following because I mean, it's just like I was saying, it's just so everybody wants a glimmer. Like maybe we all don't want to move there, but I'll watch
Mhm.
you live there and live vicariously through you.
Yeah, that's part of a tough thing too. I think I told you on the phone, but a few years back, someone did a YouTube video,
That's right.
right? And that ended up having, hundreds of thousands of followers, or people who liked it, and they were commenting it. This guy Robert Stark needs his own YouTube, and
I
I just
told
I
you.
didn't want anything to do with it, and then Life Below Zero, they saw it, and they called and they were wanting to interview me and my wife to see if we want to be on the show as one of their folk. But we watched a couple of those episodes and we were like, man, it's one, so fake, not trying to call anybody out, and two, so invasive that we didn't want that.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
we're like, okay, how can we utilize like my natural charisma and my wife's hard work ethic, and I mean the list of skills that we have combined. And so you pitching that idea of like, well, how about a newsletter? It's like, well, I wrote for a newspaper for a number of
You're a
years.
writer.
I'm a writer.
I told you. I go, listen, you're doing all the things anyway. Just have your wife film you. Feeding the chickens and tending the animals and doing all the everybody wants I would love to see that. I just live through you. I miss my chickens, but if you have some, I would love to visit and make friends with your flock.
We would love to have you. We have a little yurt
Yeah.
for guests and visitors.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, yeah, let's get that YouTube thing going and get your your newsletter going.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Just
awesome.
put your little email in there on our
Yeah.
homepage. No, $1.
$1. That seems like a bargain.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah.
This last one was like 6 pages and it's funny, it's hopeful. It's
Yeah.
rad. I'm stoked.
Yeah, I think you'll inspire other people to do. I mean, I feel like no matter where you live, you can adopt some of that good, clean living into your lifestyle.
Hmm.
Start somewhere. That's
I think
awesome.
so too.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate all your stories and all the work that you're doing, on yourself as an example, but, raising your family and giving hope to others. They say that hope is hearing other people's experiences. And so I think we got a really good, healthy dose of hope today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on and keeping this podcast running. Don't
Yeah.
lose. You got a huge audience that's going to keep growing. So you're
Yeah.
making a difference yourself.
Thank you so much. That's always good to hear. And enjoy the rest of your day with your family, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you very much. You as well.
Thanks.